students who seek to have a career in litigation or judicial clerkship in a campus that is otherwise inclined towards the corporate setup. Nonetheless, we believe that one of the key aspects to get closer to our goal is regular interaction with leading practitioners and getting their insights on various aspects of legal practice. In this regard, we are delighted to have Ms. Madhavi Divan with us today to discuss a very pertinent issue. Before starting, I would request Arunima to kindly introduce the guest for all our attendees. Arunima.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I would like to welcome you to this session on behalf of the entire NUJS litigation and clerkship cell. We hope that you've been keeping well during these tough times. Ms. Madhavi Goradia Divan is currently an additional Solicitor General of India and is the youngest woman to have been appointed to this position. Ms. Divan has a degree in English from St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and a degree in law from Pembroke College, University of Cambridge, where she was also a Cambridge Commonwealth Scholar. She started her practice at the Bombay High Court, after which she moved to the Supreme Court, where she was designated as a senior advocate in 2019. She has represented the Government of India in landmark constitutional cases in the Supreme Court, including the Triple Talaq case, the NJAC case on judges' appointments, and challenges to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Ms. Divan has also represented two state governments, Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh, in the Apex Court. Ma'am has authored the book Facets of Media Law, a textbook that is recommended in several law schools across the country. She is a co-author of Halsbury's Laws of India Environment. She has also been a contributor to the seminal publication Courts of India, Past to Present, published by the Supreme Court of India, and the book Appointment of Judges to the Supreme Court of India. She regularly writes for leading law journals and newspapers and is the editor of The Indian Advocate, a journal published by the Bar Association of India. She has been awarded the Excellence Award 2018, honoring distinguished service and contribution to media and constitution laws at the CXO and GC Leadership Summit, and the Woman Lawyer of the Year Award 2019 in the individual category for being an innovative and impactful leader in the legal profession in India at the Global Legal Summit and Legal Leaders Awards. Today, ma'am will be discussing the topic Women in Post-COVID Litigation Practice, Challenges, Opportunities, and Beyond. I would like to extend our thanks to ma'am for taking our time from her busy schedule to address us today. To make the best out of the session, we request the participants to keep their mics off and their cameras switched on. Participants are also requested to put their questions up in the chat box. Without any further delay, I would now request ma'am to take over the session.
Thank you, Arunima. Do you want to spell out the topic we are going to discuss today? Do you want to spell that out a little bit?
Yes, ma'am, the topic is Women in Post-COVID Litigation Practice, Challenges and Opportunities.
Yeah, I thought, well, I'm just making sure that the audience was in the know about this. Okay, so yes, it would really be nice to have your cameras on, because it's always nicer to be interacting with faces rather than black boxes. So I'd love it if unless it's a load on the system, please do switch on your cameras. Yeah, right. So, I thought, thank you, first of all, for inviting me. And it's always a pleasure to be, for me, in Kolkata, although today I'm only there virtually. But I do belong to Kolkata, well, very originally. So it's a very special, it's a very special connection for me. But coming to today's subject, I thought what we would do is to make it more interactive rather than my giving you a monologue. So I actually don't have a prepared text, but maybe I will speak on the subject for a little bit from perhaps my own experience. And then maybe you can take it from there, and I can, we can have a discussion and you can ask questions, and I'll try and answer them as best I can. I think what is very encouraging to start with is that there are many young men on this panel, as I can see in the audience, I can see. And it has really been my belief that on subjects concerning women, it is really important to have the men in the conversation, because, these are not subjects to be discussed in a vacuum. I think women need men to be on board and to be sensitized adequately to some of the challenges that women face. So a very warm welcome to all the young men on this in this audience. I can't see the women. I can't see you at all. Maybe I don't have the right. Yeah. All right. So, well, let me just begin with women in litigation, and then we'll talk a little about the COVID-related challenges. But women in litigation, essentially, as I see it, there are two streams. One is, of course, in the law firms, and the other is as counsel. So since you belong to Kolkata, or at least you are studying in Kolkata, you might be familiar with the traditional dual system of counsel and solicitor. And Kolkata still follows that system. I don't know whether it's still completely in vogue, but I think it's still a strong tradition at the bar to be briefed, counsel to be briefed by solicitors. And likewise, that was and continues to remain the practice in Mumbai, which is where I cut my teeth as a lawyer. I started in the Bombay High Court on the original side a long time ago, and there were many challenges for women, particularly on the counsel side. So in the law firms, of course, even back then, and this is about 25 years ago, back then there were, you were beginning to see a fair number of partners, women becoming partners in law firms. And that was, a very encouraging sign. But frankly, at the bar, you saw very few women really. I mean, there are women, lots of women who started, but they kind of fell off the ladder at some point and either got frustrated and left, or circumstances were such that they could not continue. But for whatever reason, even in a what one perceives to be a relatively progressive bar in Bombay, particularly the original side, one really didn't see very many women make it to the top. In fact, only a couple of years ago, or even perhaps less than that, there was a batch of senior advocates who were designated, and there were no women on that list. There were absolutely no women, and that is a great shame for a city like Bombay, which has had very strong traditions, to have not even one woman being designated as a senior advocate. I think it's really something that we need to introspect about. And even on there were very few women who even thought themselves worthy of applying for designation, because there were only 2 women even in the list of candidates who were seeking designation. So that also tells us something about where we are as a system. In the Supreme Court, you will find, yes, there are a number of now senior advocates. Well, only a handful compared to the men, but still we do have some senior advocates. But then again, only time will tell whether these women can really attract that kind of briefing, and particularly outside of what is known as the sort of women-centric kind of subjects, which are usually family law. I mean, very often you see, and this is a bit of a stereotype, that very often you see that in litigation in family law, a woman would be the first choice for a male litigant in a custody battle or whatever, and they perceive that the perception is, oh, you're going to soften the judge by getting a woman counsel. So these are silly little tactics which are often adopted, but frankly that is not the test of the merit of these women counsel. And to my mind, given the fact that litigation, as arguing counsel, that is the real rough and tumble of litigation, and that's where women, unfortunately, so far have been the farthest behind. I think that will change. That will change in the next 10 or 20 years. And I think that, therefore, it is really time for people like you to start thinking very seriously on what you can do right to get there. When I was growing up at the bar, or even otherwise before that, I don't think I had I had no inkling really of how my gender was going to impact my trajectory. And that is something, sometimes it's just ignorance that is bliss. So you don't know how how hard the task ahead is going to be, and therefore you're willing to try it out. But then again, the other side of it is that perhaps had one known how things were going to pan out, of the challenges that one could face, perhaps one could plan a little better. And it has generally been my belief over the last few years that, look, women need to be mentored, women need to know about the challenges they are going to face so that they can plan better for themselves. So I think it's wonderful that we're having this conversation. Now, on the post-COVID world, I would say this, that things have changed, and I think from a women litigants' point of view, I think they are going to change for the better, because this time has taught us many lessons. And I think that given the way technology, it's sort of working in fits and starts, but I think technology is really going to be a great advantage for women in the kind of mobility and access that it's going to give. It's going to give a lot of counsel, that kind of mobility, but I think it's absolutely critical for women, because I will give you a couple of examples from my own, from what I faced as a woman counsel in a very progressive bar like the Bombay bar. It was very important back then. And now it feels so kind of fuddy-duddy and old and kind of outdated, that when we joined the bar in Bombay, and we were lots of young counsel, there were a lot of young men who might have been about maybe a year or 2 years senior to me, and they gave me all the sort of good lessons on what to do and what not to do, and I was very grateful to them, because most of them came from families who belonged to, they were usually sons of senior counsel, and kind of they had been there, grown up in the system, and so they knew the ropes, and I didn't. So I remember that you were told that at just before the lunch break was to be over, that was the time to sit around the library and wait for some small, the clerks from the law firms would come around and offer small briefs for circulation, or, some little application or the other. And that was the time that, you really cut your teeth as a counsel. You made an application, you mustered the courage to say a few words in court and get some order or the other from the bench. And so you had to sit around at that particular time. And my recollection is that when we, there would be say 6 or 7 or 8 of us sitting around a table, waiting for those little briefs to come by. So no matter in what sequence or order we were sitting, the clerk would go around, dutifully offering the brief to each young man over there. And only if they all said no, each one of them said no, and then he would ask me. So I was always the counsel of the last resort. But, all this is going to change. I don't think people sit around the table now like they used to. That is definitely going to change. Another example which I can think of is when I was I was to have my first child was on her way, and my husband bought me a mobile phone. I mean, the mobile phone was pretty new at the time. I know that sounds, I mean, it's an unthinkable world to most of you, or all of you actually, but it was quite a prized possession to have a mobile phone, and he didn't have one himself, but he got me one because he felt that this is going to give you a more mobility. And I can tell you that it was a really liberating thing to have a mobile phone, because otherwise, you know, if a solicitor wanted to get in touch with you, he would call at that time, you know, at my senior's office. And so the solicitor always knew whether you were in the chambers or not. And, you know, if the office staff told the solicitor that, look, you know, she's already gone home at 5 o'clock, you know, it reflected very badly on you. And no one cares really whether you're going home for a good reason or you're just going out for an outing. No one cares about that. So, you know, it was very important to be perceived as being very serious and out there and available and accessible and, you know, ready to work on the brief that was given to you. So this mobile phone was actually quite liberating because no one really knew where you were. So, I mean, you know, you could be home, you could be with your baby, and, you know, you could yet be available for work. So I think that was very liberating, that you physically did not have to be in office. And I think that now in the post-COVID world, I don't think we are really going to, I can't imagine now going back to a completely physical court. I think these are choices. A virtual hearing is something, you know, that option should always be available because it saves a lot of costs also. You know, we find that, you know, earlier you'd have to fly down to X court or Y court to you know, in different cities. You know, whole teams would be flown. I still remember a time when, you know, teams from, say, Bombay would be just parked in Delhi in the Supreme Court for days on end, and this was a hugely expensive litigation. So I think that, you know, I can't imagine now going back to that kind of time where you had to sort of give up all your work in Bombay, say, for days on end to do one matter in the Supreme Court. I mean, I can't imagine that happening, and it would be just extraordinarily expensive anyway for the client. So I think in that kind of system, where, you know, technology is going to certainly create more mobility for women and create more access for them. So now, you know, you can have a young family and you can be at home, and yet you can be doing your matters and you can be available. The other thing is, you know, in a lot of the time, the perception is that, oh, you know, we won't brief a woman counsel may be discounted. Though personally, I can't say that I have felt that way. But, you know, often the perception is, no, you take a male rather than a female because you feel that the male counsel will be able to sort of, you know, stand up in court or be more aggressive. These are, you know, perceptions that people have, which they think are, you know, formula for success, but it's not necessarily that way. And I think that in this new virtual world, where, you know, it is a question of just unmuting your mic and your camera. I think that, you know, you can make a very, you know, you don't have to be an aggressive counsel to be able to succeed in making a good argument. So I think these are things that are certainly going to help women, one, of course, balance their other responsibilities and enjoy their families. I don't think it should always be perceived as a, you know, a great burden or a, you know, something that weighs down on you. You should be able to enjoy your family and at the same time be able to to fulfill your professional responsibilities. So I think that this virtual world creates new opportunities. It creates a platform where you can have a very civilized argument where you don't have to be shouting and jostling and that kind of thing. So I think there are huge opportunities, and I see enormous, silver linings. Of course, I think women are going to have to figure out how they are going to balance the, you know, you can't have a wailing child coming into the room while you're addressing the court. It's going to be a little stressful being able to balance both things, but then we are cutting down on travel time. there are lots of changes that are taking place. I mean, to give you one example, just before the pandemic, there was a matter in Imphal, in the Manipur High Court, which we were trying to figure out dates when I could fly down over there and address the court. And because the flights are few and far between, and at a particular time of the day, I would have to miss the afternoon before and go there. So we were just not able to find the right slot of dates. And then the pandemic happened, and suddenly it felt so easy. We sort of, it was done virtually, and the matter got over very quickly. So, likewise, I think, it's a huge mobility, a huge saver of time in many ways. So I see a lot of opportunities for women over there. And I think, things have never looked better. So with that, I think I'll hand over to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this enlightening talk. Ma'am, so before people put their questions in chat box, I wanted to ask, ma'am, so when you tell that things are looking much better and easier at the moment, ma'am, is it also applicable for young women or young litigants who are entering into the profession, and when they are trying to establish themselves or trying to build rapport with other members at the bar? So will this virtual setup be difficult for young litigants who are entering into the profession?
Yeah, well, yes, you're absolutely right there. It is a very hard time for young litigants because one is, I think, it is important also to experience that little bit of rough and tumble, to be physically in chambers where you learn the skills. I mean, for example, right now, the situation that we are in, I have a number of young colleagues, but none of them are coming into chambers, and we just want to, ensure that there is a sort of a safe environment for everybody. So yes, I think they do miss that. So, I mean, for example, I have now 3 young colleagues whom I've never met physically. So, that's hard. And I think you tend to pick up a lot of skills when you're physically there, when you are, feeling the tension of a matter while it's going on. You're scrambling for papers. What is that point? Where is that point? And, you're sort of learning to think on your feet. And here we are right now, we are getting WhatsApp messages, and we are exchanging thoughts on WhatsApp, which is problematic. You're right. I think this is a very difficult time in that sense for young people generally. And also perhaps to pick up work, it is probably access in that sense at a very junior level is impacted. But I had an interaction with some other students several months ago, actually, during the pandemic, and what I had suggested is that, look, if you are looking for a career in litigation, I think it's really, really important to be well read generally, and to be, adequately exposed to different disciplines. It's not just about the law, and therefore it's not enough to just read up about the law. You've got to know about what is going on, say, in the business environment. If you're doing, commercial litigation, you have to know what's. I'll just give you an example. I'm currently doing a case on the real estate regulation, the Act, and there's some very interesting questions which have come up there. The matter is sub judice currently. And, I have been trying to look up developments in the real estate industry in India over the past, say, 3 decades, and I am trying to compare it to how it works in other countries. Now, I mean, I'm not going to find this ever in the law books. And I'm asking the people I know to get an idea of how it works, because ultimately, law is not something that works in a vacuum. It's not a bubble. It's meant to do justice to real people in the real world. And therefore, I think it's really important to get an understanding of what happens in the real world. And therefore, I think that this time can be very well utilized to read up on different things. I'm not saying just read up the law. And you will be amazed as to how that comes handy. you never know when. And this is something, when you are in, well, I certainly experienced this, and I don't know if you can relate to this, but I'll share it with you, that when I was a student, there would be milestones in terms of, you have to take an exam at certain intervals. So, you study for that exam, and then, the result is there, right there for you to see. I worked so hard for whatever, 4 months or 3 months, and then, I got my result, and, you see the direct correlation between your work and the result. And, and at the end of the year, whatever, you get your certificate or your award, or you make it to the next year, you get your degree or whatever it is. So, when you're a student, the milestones are set for you. What you need to do to get there is set for you. This when you're out there as a professional, there are no set milestones. You don't know when your next brief is going to come. You may have to wait many days for that brief to come. I mean, I'm talking about, in counsel practice. It may not be there if you are you have a job in a law firm, but certainly in counsel practice that will be the case. So this is, an area where, one, you require a lot of staying power. You require a lot of tenacity. Oh, I didn't get a brief. I mean, there was a time when I've spoken about this before, but when I came back after and this is relevant for the young women here, when I came back to work after my first child was born, and I came back reasonably quickly, this was not a job. So I didn't have work waiting for me. And it took 5 months of being there every day, every working day. I was there in court around my senior, but it didn't yield a single new brief for 5 months. For 5 months, I was there every day, and there was not one single brief. And most of the briefs that I'd held before that were naturally, because I was not there for 2 or 3 months, they were redistributed to, other young men at the bar. And, that naturally matters needed to be attended to, and therefore the solicitors probably engaged other people, and they were young men. But, it's very difficult, no matter what, you are putting in. It's not as if it's going to yield something immediately in return. And that is, it took me a long time to understand that. And I think it's important to share that experience, because you will find that, I used to sit oftentimes in conferences with my senior, watching him, sometimes not even understanding the subject that was being discussed or the nuances of the argument. But, something was sinking in somewhere. Obviously it was, because later, all those years later, even when I moved to the Supreme Court, I suddenly found those skills were coming in use. And, so I remember other people asking me sometimes, so how is it, your written submissions, where did you pick up those skills? And I said, that's the way I grew up at the bar. That's what I learned. And so sometimes when, you think that it's not yielding something immediately in return, it doesn't mean anything. This is a profession which requires, you have to be there in the long haul. Otherwise, it's not for the faint-hearted. It's not for people who want, returns immediately. It's not going to happen that way if you're looking at counsel practice. So therefore, I think you have to be ready to invest that kind of time, and your reading in these years is going to be critical. Because I really think that people who are completely, law-centric or bookish in that sense in their approach are going to miss out on the larger picture. So I think use this time in different ways. And, yes, I know financially it may be difficult. It may be difficult, and you need to sort yourself out on that front. But if you want to be in litigation in the long term, I think you really need to don't expect the rewards in the early years. So that's what I feel.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, we have another question in the chat box.
Sure.
Shreya is asking, there has been a demand for reservation for female advocates at different bar councils. So what is your opinion on this? Do we really need this reservation at bar?
I'm not a great votary of a reservation for women as senior counsel. And only last year, I did have an interaction with some young women counsel at the Bombay Bar. And one of the young ladies did ask me that question that, and she was very, vehement about this, that, you have to give enough space. Now, see, at the end of the day, the bottom line is this, that you may be designated because, you may create a certain space for women. But, ultimately, it is the market that dictates, right? So you are going to have to be briefed by other briefing lawyers who may be men, they may be women. But unless they look upon you as a choice, as a briefing choice, it's not going to help. So that flap on your shoulder, which is your senior gown, is not necessarily going to yield briefing. So unless there is some kind of rule which requires men to be or women to be briefing women lawyers, I don't think that's going to yield any result, frankly. But I would say yes, that the difficulty for women is oftentimes that they are not perceived as even choices as junior counsel very often. I mean, that has happened to me. I mean, I shouldn't, and I mean, I'm very open about this because I think it's important for others to know this, whether younger people or, there were times when I worked up briefs, worked very hard. The solicitors appreciated it. I'm talking about when I was a junior in my seniors chamber in Bombay. And then, when it came to a choice of junior counsel, it would be some young man who is usually the son of a senior counsel. So, I mean, not that that person wasn't meritorious. I mean, that person might have been very, very meritorious. I'm not taking that away for a moment. But, when briefing lawyers have choices, they may choose that, the easier, the sort of more bankable choice, at least what they perceive in their minds at the time. But you know what? I mean, these are things which perhaps set you back a little bit at that time. But I think it kind of it strengthened my resolve to do better and to ensure that somebody would take notice at some point. And so I think yes, it's going to be a much harder journey for women. Make no mistake, even your generation, it is going to be harder. But so, and then the only way you can shine out is just by being better. You just got to be better at your work. Every time you get a brief, you've just got to deliver much better than the young man sitting next to you. So, I mean, that's the only way. That is the only way. I don't think this, a kind of reservation or any kind of affirmative action, beyond a point, it doesn't help. And I can tell you this, that some years ago, there were designations in the Supreme Court. Fair number of women were designated. But, there was some tittering at the bar that, so this is not going to yield anything. And it may not have yielded very much. So I think the more important thing is to try and create opportunities at a lower level so that they get a chance to appear, to argue, to develop their confidence. And I can tell you this also, that look, even women make a lot of mistakes. Even in the Supreme Court, I have seen oftentimes when, say, a husband and wife happen to be lawyers, they work together. And the wife is usually following the husband around. So, if you put yourself in that position, no matter who is more competent between the two of you, either you try and establish an independent identity. But if you follow around the man, it's not going to help your cause at all. So, I mean, these are things which we need to bear in mind.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, the next question is by Sayam Jha, and he's asking, considering there is a general gender-based wage gap, do you think the same applies to the field of litigation as well? If so, is there a way that we can overcome the same in long term?
I don't think so. Frankly, I don't know as far as the law firms are concerned. But as far as counsel are concerned, I think counsel command their own fee. They're free to command whatever fee, and then eventually, I think it is. I don't see it in the. I mean, of course, you're right if you're saying that by and large, women counsel are probably commanding less fee than the top bracket men in the Supreme Court. But then the problem is that the women are not at that level. They're just not there among the top 10 or top 15 counsel in the Supreme Court. They're not there. So till they get there, we'll never know. And it's all a vicious circle. So why are they not getting there? Is it is it lack of opportunity? Is it lack of confidence? Is it a fact that there's an imbalance as far as the judiciary is concerned? There are not enough women up there. Is that going to make a difference when you have more women up there as judges? Are you going to have more women counsel doing better? These are all it's a complex question. So the whole system needs to sort of inch forward.
One of our members from the cell, Shubhajit, wants to ask a question himself. So I'd request Shubhajit to unmute and ask the question. Shubhajit, are you there? Okay, ma'am. Till then, maybe Arunima can ask her question.
So, ma'am, that was a very enlightening session. My question isn't really related to the topic. It's more related to your role as an additional Solicitor General. So, how do you deal with cases where the stand of the union government might differ from how you personally feel about the issue? Like, how do you differentiate between your personal opinion and the professional stand you have to take?
That question actually is not necessarily related to my role as an ASG, I would say, because as a lawyer, oftentimes you may not you may not completely identify. Even in a non-government role, you need not identify, or you shouldn't actually identify yourself. I mean, that takes your objectivity away. And oftentimes, even as a private lawyer, there have been you've been on a side where it's not necessarily something you completely believe in, but that's also part of being a professional. You can't really choose your briefs, and so long as you are you're ultimately you're an officer of the court, and you're really assisting the court in arriving at a just solution, and you're therefore putting across to the bench a certain side of the arguments, and the other side will do its job. So when it comes to government, frankly, I can't see very many cases that I have been offered where I feel that I don't agree with this, and why are we doing this? A lot of the cases that I have been appearing in, I feel quite strongly in some of them, and I feel that sometimes maybe we should put up a harder fight, because it's taxpayers' money. Oftentimes, there are and oftentimes I feel very strongly, because I always find that the other side is so much better prepared, or their whole that whole ecosystem on the private lawyer side. On the private side, it works, there's more money to spend. They engage the top bracket lawyers. The assistance is of a certain quality, whereas on the other side, we are struggling with, perhaps I would say, I would go to the extent of saying, less competent assistants. Much less competent assistants. Sometimes, of course, there are always spots of very hardworking, good officers you get. Sometimes there are a few good young lawyers also you get for assistance, but by and large, there is a phenomenal imbalance. And sometimes you see that a case is really crying out for help, and you feel that you want to, and it certainly gets me worked up sometimes, that we should be able to do better than this. Uh, I feel, that sometimes, and you see, government is not just about politics and the political side. Government is the state. So oftentimes it's serious, taxpayers' money that is being, or there's a public cause which is being defended in the sense, for example, I mean, to give you one example, say under the IBC, there was a litigation on personal guarantors, whether whether the validity of that law was being tested. And I mean, there are details which I won't be able to share with you, but I saw the unevenness of the fight at many levels, and I saw that as a counsel on the government side how hard it was. But we got lucky and successful. Our strategy paid off. But I saw the difficulty in it, and who were these personal guarantors? They were people who were on whose strength, hundreds and hundreds of crores of rupees of public money from public sector banks, which had been taken and stashed away in some havens abroad, and there was no accountability. And how they are able to play the system. You can get an injunction and sit on it forever and ever. And it's costing the state something. It's costing us taxpayers something. So therefore, I think, or similarly in the Amazon Flipkart, I mean, the final lap is, of course, listed in the Supreme Court on Monday. But, I saw that, they were able to, Amazon and Flipkart, engaging the best, the finest lawyers in the country. They were sitting on an injunction for 1.5 years. Now, if those allegations against them are true, then it means that possibly, small traders are losing their livelihoods, that competition may be just sort of pushed out in the meantime. And this was one of our arguments before the Karnataka High Court, that look, it's very important that this investigation is conducted quickly and concluded, whichever way it goes. Because there's a huge public interest at stake over there. But it is very difficult. The balance, is you see that difficulty. You don't get the same kind of assistance.
Thank you, ma'am. Our another question is asked by Sujoy. He's asking, ma'am, your analysis about the future of women in litigation is based on the assumption that virtual framework will continue in future. Do you really think that courts will post-COVID prefer virtual hearings over physical hearings, or will the situation go back at any point?
Well, I'm only saying this. I think physical courts have to return. We can't be completely virtual. But I think that it will certainly, I imagine that we will have some opportunity or some hybrid system. I can see that emerging, because I think now lawyers also have been have realized that we can cut down on costs. Clients have realized that they can cut down on costs. Like I told you about these big teams flying down from Bombay and setting up in 5-star hotels, and this going on for days. Now, from a professional standpoint also, you may not want to spend that kind of time doing one case. You may be able to do 2 or 3 together. So you may not want to do that. Also, it's just prohibitively expensive for a client to just do that. So I think, for example, this afternoon I was having a conversation with someone from the Bombay High Court, and what he said that, the appellate side practice in the High Court has been really affected, because now the district court lawyers realize that we can address the Bombay High Court ourselves. Why do we need to engage somebody over there? So it is going to have an impact. I mean, it is going to change things. So once you have this opportunity, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure not to let it go. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. I think Shubhajit can now ask his question. He's raising hand. Yeah, Shubhajit, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, ma'am. Actually, I dropped out due to bandwidth issues. Ma'am, what I wanted to know was, while interning at the district court circuits in Kolkata and in the High Court, I saw that there was a huge disparity between men and women in the courts. Whatever women I could find were mostly interns like myself, or whenever I used to go to the libraries in the Calcutta High Court and all, I just saw plethora of men there and very few women, and even those being juniors or interns. So when I asked my senior, they said that the representation of women in Calcutta High Court is particularly very bad. What I wanted to know is that is there any high court in the country where the woman representation is much better, and what kind of approach can we have to increase the woman representation, in particularly in those courts where it's in abysmally low rate?
Sorry, the last bit of your, I didn't follow the last little bit.
Ma'am, what I wanted to know is that what is there any high courts
Yeah.
in India wherein the women representation is better, and what can we incorporate changes that we can incorporate in the circuits where it is abysmally low to improve the
Yes.
representation at somewhat?
Well, I think you're right that representation of women in a lot of the courts is very low, and particularly, see, let's start with the judiciary itself, right? Now, today in the Supreme Court, with a sanctioned strength of 31 judges, we have only one woman. Okay, and that is really it's outrageously low. Okay, and now, for example, I remember some years ago there was a visit by the Kenyan Chief Justice. And we had an interaction, and I was asked to be present. I'm talking about several years ago, and at that time also we had only one woman justice. Justice Bhanumati was in the Supreme Court at the time, and he asked me this question. He said that, how is it that you have only one woman a judge? And in a lot of the African countries, there's a very high representation of women judges. And it so happened that at that time in Kenya, the deputy chief justice was a woman, and she was a woman of Indian origin. So, I mean, doesn't that say something about that country? On the other hand, we had one woman judge at that time in the Supreme Court, and there's only one left now. So I think if we begin with a stronger representation of women in the Supreme Court, it would really help. But having said this, again, I'm not talking of any form of affirmative action. I think if we look hard enough, we can find women who are completely, up to the job and would certainly be make good judges. Unfortunately, some years ago, you see, sometimes the choices are also not well made. Because, for instance, and particularly, you see, when you have a small representation of a particular disadvantaged community, it is all the more necessary that that person be more meritorious. I mean, I have often heard the talk at the bar is that, when there are, we must have more women judges, and then the names will come up, and if they are not quite up to the mark, the response will be, so what? Are the men that competent? So what if the women are not that competent? And I personally, I do not agree with that, because ultimately it becomes, it's about, the whole community gets branded. That whole section of society gets branded if you have one person who is just not up to the mark. And I'll tell you very frankly that, some years ago, we had one woman judge in the Supreme Court who sat late every single day. Now, this is absolutely inexcusable. That you should come late to court every day, sometimes by an hour, sometimes by an hour and a half. I mean, what kind of message are you sending out? And whatever good reason you might have, we don't know, but this is just not absolutely inexcusable. So, and this sends out a message that, women are just not up to the mark. So, we need to, of course, set things right as far as representation of women in judges is concerned. And what we find is that when the lower down you go in the judiciary, there are a lot of young women judges at the lower level. When, the selection process is merit oriented in the sense that it's based on an exam and all of that, you'll find a lot of women in the lower courts. But as you go higher, and the method of selection becomes less and less transparent in that sense, you find that there are less women. So that is definitely a problem. The other thing is that, sometimes it so happens that women lose out because, they are at a certain time in their lives, they take time off their careers and they are raising a family. And I think, I recently, I was talking to a senior advocate, a woman who practices in Delhi, and she told me that she was being considered for judgeship, but she lost out because she was by then too old, and she had taken 8 years off to raise her child. And so, why should the age be, the cutoffs be the same for men and women who have families? So, it's something to think about, that you're losing out on some very competent women because they have made that sacrifice for their families. So, and it's also important, this is something I want to say, that look, it's also important for us to, the importance given to raising a family. That's the next generation of people. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that this is only a woman's job. No, certainly not. I think men have to, and I think this generation of men increasingly are being sensitized to the idea of joint raising of a family. And that is very important from their own point of view, from the child's point of view, and as a family unit. But having said that, the fact remains that at least in the early years or the early phase, women do get put back a little in their careers, at least a little, because one, of course, the physical, the fact that you've born a child, the fact that you're on maternity leave, or you have, those early months at least you've taken off, and then it's not easy after that. But you still, the point that I really want to make here is that you have to be, the perception also, sorry, and that's one important point I wanted to make, is that, in my own case, I felt that I came back reasonably quickly, or pretty quickly, I would say. But it was in the mind of other people that, look, we don't know whether she's going to last out. We don't know whether, she's serious enough. We don't know. And maybe, and women often find it very difficult. One day the child is sick, one day something happens, and, I can't come to work. Now, you can't do that in counsel practice. We've got to brief, we've got to argue it, you've got to argue it. So, in the perception in the mind of the briefing solicitor is that, oh, I don't know. If I can get a guy, let me get a male counsel. And also, the perception that, no, maybe, she's well taken care of. She doesn't really need to earn a living. That is also a perception that other people have. So one is the actual juggle which you have to do. And two is the perception in the mind of the briefing attorney. So that is, these are, I would say that, so in response to your question, I would say, one, we need definitely more women judges at all levels. And also to get women up to a certain level in the profession, we need to ensure that they're getting briefing opportunities. That can be done through various methods like sensitizing, say, law firms. Now, one would have thought that with many more women partners, women will get more briefing at the bar. Especially, I'm talking about now commercial work. Women get a lot, fair amount of work when it comes to family law, or these, what are regarded as quote unquote softer areas of the law. My point is that, look, if you enjoy doing family law, please do it by all means. Personally, I don't enjoy it. But then again, in commercial, in the real, the cream commercial work, you will find lesser and lesser women in counsel practice, arguing practice. So how do we change that? Now, your top law firms today across the country have a lot of women partners. The question is, are they briefing the women? Probably not. I don't know, but because I'm in a certain, I'm right now in government practice, so I really don't know. But I don't see that happen on a large scale. Maybe they will say that, look, there are not enough choices. But if it's not as if star counsel are just falling out of the skies. They come up from the bar, they get opportunities, and that's the way they make it forward, right? So if you don't nourish that sapling from the start, you're not going to get a flowering tree, are you? So therefore, how do we create that? And I remember raising this at a panel, a discussion on a similar or related subject, and there was a law firm partner, a youngish woman. She must have been, well, youngish, I'm saying she might have been even 40, but and I said, maybe the women partners need to think about making women a choice, a briefing choice. And she said, no, listen, why don't you ask the men? Because we've got enough problems of our own. And I thought, like, that is a really strange thing to say. That was my first response. But I realized that, look, maybe they are battling their own little struggles within the firms, where if they are seen to be favoring women, they will be in trouble within. I don't know. So they may be having their own issues. So, we are in a churn. And at the end of the day, you see, you have now, earlier, the competition was amongst men. Today, the competition is amongst both men and women, and you're sharing, it's not as if work may have grown commensurately. I don't know.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, how many more questions can we take?
No, maybe you can take a couple, maybe.
Okay, sure, ma'am. Sure, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, Abhinav Gupta is asking, do you think there would be an exponential increase in litigation post-COVID, or has the virtual mode of hearings been able to fill the gap?
No, I don't think the virtual mode of hearing has yet been able to fill the gap. It has certainly, I think, it's actually strange, because when the pandemic just started and the virtual courts had just begun, some of my contemporaries and I were chatting, and one of them, who had been designated as a senior counsel around the same time as me, he said that, this is a phenomenal opportunity for young senior counsel, because, maybe with the economic, downturn, clients won't be able to afford the superstars, and therefore maybe they will come to people like him. But the truth has been that you see more and more of the superstars, which is wonderful. But the more modest rungs of the bar have definitely been impacted, and their cases. I mean, one young counsel told me that they are really keen on the physical court starting, because the kind of profile that their clients have, they are not comfortable with the virtual mode. So they say, no, please get our case adjourned till the physical courts start. So, that is a problem. And you see, now there's a lot of disparity even in different parts of the country. Of course, between courts and lower courts, of course, very badly affected. There are a lot of people who don't even have access to devices. So, that's also a problem. The Bombay High Court, for example, is not able to work the full week. They're not working for all days of the week, because, the staff needs to come in trains. So they are, they're not able to come every day. It is definitely, I wouldn't say it's better to have virtual courts than no courts, for sure. I mean, that at least in the Supreme Court, I would say the Delhi High Court, for example, I say, reasonable success, certainly reasonable success. The fact is that our court system is functioning, but not naturally. It's not. I think with a little improvement in technology, of course, we can do much better, but no, it's not fill the gap.
Okay, ma'am, and the final question is from Sayam, and he would like to ask it himself.
I hope I'm audible, ma'am.
Yes, absolutely.
Ma'am, considering there is an acute imbalance when it comes to female judges in India, do you think the Indian judiciary needs an overall sensitization with respect to challenges and difficulties women today face, for a more receptive and aware justice of the delivery of the justice system?
Absolutely. You see, I think, it's only in a country as diverse as ours, whether, we're talking of gender diversity, or we're talking of, other kinds of diversity, whether you have religious diversity, people from different, more disadvantaged sections of society. In South Africa, for example, the point was that race is such a big issue, and their constitution actually provides that a certain proportion of the seats will go to women and to Black South Africans. So therefore, their constitution actually provides for it. Here, there is no such thing, but there is at least an unwritten rule that there will be regional representation. In our, say, for example, our Supreme Court, the regional representation is quite phenomenal. In that way, it is a mini India, but at the same time, are people from different communities represented, women represented, and ultimately, if the collegium decides. And when we were doing this NJAC case, which was some years ago, I had helped on the side of the union government at the time, and we found a practice which is prevalent. It was documented in other jurisdictions. I can't remember the name, but it was basically, a tendency of judges when they tend to appoint judges themselves. They want to see someone in their own image. So if I'm white and upper class, then I will want to see someone similar to me replace me. So that tendency is there. So therefore, in that process, obviously the other communities, you're sort of self-perpetuating in that sense, and other communities definitely get left out. Now you see there is some pressure, but at the same time, I agree that maybe the sensitization is not enough. The pool of talent also is not enough at that level of the bar. For example, where do you see so many men who are superstars? Where are the women? Where are the women? So, and that is, of course, as I said, it's a combination of lack of opportunity. It's no point, picking them up, somebody, because you've got to fill a seat. You've got to show some women on the bench is not enough. You've got to nurture people from the start, give them opportunities from the start so that they can really flower and blossom later. So I think sensitization, yes, is certainly there, and we've got to be more flexible then in what I mentioned to you. If a woman took 8 years off in raising a family, she shouldn't be punished for it if she is competent. Because she's of a certain age, you don't knock her out, because you're losing a lot of talent. So it can't be. We've got to be a little more flexible, perhaps, on that count.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your for this discussion and taking all the questions. Before closing, ma'am, I wanted to ask, this is not exactly a question, but in the beginning of the session, I mentioned that ours is a campus which is more inclined towards, corporate setup. And people don't usually found, the environment conducive for litigation or alternative career options. So what would be your advice for students? I think all the attendees who are here are more or less interested joining the bar after graduating. So, ma'am, what would be your advice for all of us?
My advice would be that don't expect magic immediately for many, many years. If you're joining the law firms, then I really don't have any experience in a law firm to be able to advise you one way or the other, except that from what I understand, that's a very, very hard life. On this side also, it is a hard life, but I think there are great advantages depending on your temperament, of course, in being self-employed. But again, I think it's easier said than done, because one, it requires a lot of financial staying power in the early years. There are young colleagues I have, and I see them. They've left law firms to join the bar, it's not easy. It's not easy, particularly in a place, say, like Delhi, which does not have a council system. So, I mean, let me tell you that from my own experience, that when I came from the Bombay High Court to the Supreme Court, it was a bit of a shock because there was no concept of counsel. You were a senior counsel, a designated senior counsel, or um, you were a briefing advocate or an AOR, an advocate on record. There was no concept at all of junior counsel. So I would say that to that extent, places like the Bombay Bar are better places if you're looking for, opportunities as a counsel. Definitely better. But of course, you've got to get the right chamber and that kind of thing. You don't get paid over there, which is, in some ways, it's a recognition that you're a professional, and you will get, I mean, even though I had no connections that way in Bombay, but I still got a trickle of work in my first couple of years. I got a trickle of work. It was certainly not enough to sustain me financially, but you start getting briefed whether to draft a plain, draft a writ petition, go and appear for circulation or something. But that is not the case in the Delhi High Court, or it's different in other courts. So maybe Kolkata will offer those opportunities also for young counsel. So you've got to really cut your coat very, very carefully. And only if you're willing to, have that kind of staying power and uncertainty, not have definite milestones in mind, only then will you be able to, I think, bubble up.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
With this, we come to the end of session, and ma'am, honestly, we could not have asked for a more insightful inaugural session for us. And now I would request Prashasti to deliver the vote of thanks and formally conclude the session.
Very good evening, ma'am. On behalf of the whole litigation and clerkship cell, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude towards you for having such a great session. I mean, the whole anecdotes and the way you shared your experience, right, from the counsel of last resort to having a mobile phone, which was an enriching experience, and then coming to the fact that being in court litigation and everything is not for the faint-hearted. It's all about being tenacious, having that tenacity and trying to overpower the other gender in a way so that you can excel in the field and gain recognition, and the same is applicable to you. So I guess this whole session and the discussion with you has been a really wide-ranging experience for all of us. I mean, I think that all of us who have attended this session have taken in something or the other from listening to you, and we hope that we have further discussions in the go as you have started. And the major point that I think is the best that I could learn from the session was the aspect of sensitizing people as to from the lower benches, the frame that you mentioned, that we have to nurture people to let them grow as a flower and from a sapling to a flowering tree. That was a really beautiful aspect that you detailed about, rather than going for the affirmative actions and such phenomenon. So I guess this was a really truly enlightening session for all of us, ma'am, and all of us will have learned something from this, not only the attendees, but everybody in our college too, maybe from further discussions. So thank you so much, ma'am, for the session.
Thank you. And I'll just say very quickly at the end that, we shouldn't have any set notions in our mind about men being insensitive to women, or women not receiving briefing from men, because there are no set rules like that. I might add that a lot of my briefing opportunities actually came from men, perhaps more men than women. So, and I'm very grateful. I haven't forgotten those good turns that people did me and the opportunities that they gave me. So I think, sometimes women are not adequately sensitive to other women. So, there are no set notions here. So we shouldn't have these preconceived notions. And I think that it's wonderful to have been here and to have seen so many young men also on this session. So thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, ma'am.